Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir à tous et à toutes, and welcome to tonight's presentation of OTF Connects, titled The Power of Materials in Learning with Tessa Effernan. We have a very nice, rather small group actually tonight, but with mostly experienced users. And small groups are always a great opportunity to foster participation. So we certainly welcome all your comments, ideas and questions in the chat box throughout this session. As usual, I would like to thank all of you for taking time away from your families to join us over OTF Connects and share your experiences. Comme d'habitude, je voudrais profiter de l'occasion pour souhaiter la bienvenue à nos collègues franco-ontariens. Nos sessions sont principalement en anglais, mais si vous désirez obtenir des informations en français, surtout n'hésitez pas à me contacter par la suite. We are definitely thrilled and happy to have each and every one of you with us tonight, and it's also our absolute pleasure to welcome Tessa Effernan. Tessa has extensive hands-on experience in kindergarten, both as a classroom teacher and kindergarten planning time teacher for 11 years. She has also worked as a planning time teacher for grade 1, 2, and 3, as a teacher librarian, and as a special education resource teacher. Tessa is currently working for the Upper Grand District School Board as an early learning instructional coach. This is Tessa's very first session with OTF Connects. She has lots of interesting and innovative ideas to share with us tonight. We certainly wish to thank her for accepting our invitation tonight and look forward to her presentation. So at this point, let's jump right in and let's invite Tessa to share her experience with us. So Tessa, please feel free to click on your talk button. Yes, you've done it already. Perfect. And go ahead anytime you want.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks, Michelle. I'm so excited to be here tonight and so grateful that you've taken time out of your own personal busy schedules to join me. As Michelle said, it's my first run through tonight, so I'm so excited to co-learn along with you. I'm seeing some familiar names from Twitter, I think, and I'm also seeing some names from our school board and looking forward to meeting those of you who I've not yet met either in person or virtually. So I'm just going to move into our journey tonight. Absolutely, as Michelle said, we really want you to share your thinking along the way. This is one of my favorite quotes. Everyone you will ever meet knows something you don't. And so this is really about our co-learning journey tonight. Every time I'm working with a new educator or a new team, I take something else away. So I'm so excited for how this will impact my learning journey tonight. Just a quick overview of our evening. I've got a few slides of introduction just to let us think a little bit about context. We're going to spend a good amount of time on provocations and some thinking behind that. Then we'll move into embedding math and literacy into play, some talk around enhancing centers, and a little bit on classroom design to think about, and then a brief amount on small group learning materials at the very end. The other piece that I've learned is really important for my own learning is some time to reflect along the way. And so I want to give some time for that this evening and give you some time to be thinking as we move through this webinar. So throughout the night, there may be a specific connection or reflection question, or we might be asking multiple questions where you can pick what resonates with you. So when we're thinking about connection, we're thinking about how is what we're talking about tonight connecting with what you might already be doing, because you'll be doing lots of really rich things already in your classroom, so we want to confirm lots of that. The reflection piece is on what are you thinking about in your own context based on what we're discussing. The inspection piece is what might you be inspired to dig deeper into about your own practice. And then direction, how might the conversations we're having tonight impact some different paths that you might try on your journey. So lots of time for us to talk tonight. Something that I've realized about myself is that a powerful amount of learning for me comes through stories. And so I just kind of want to connect to that story piece as we start tonight and connect it to materials. So I want you to think a little bit about, in your earliest memories as a child, what was one of the most powerful materials that you had a learning encounter with? And I want to tell you a brief story while you think about that. My earliest memory of rich materials comes in my backyard and with my brother and the chestnut tree that was growing in our backyard. And the first thing I think about is all of those changes that took place, from the blossoms into those prickly chestnuts. And then we discovered the chestnuts inside of those prickle pieces. And we started to sort and wash the chestnuts as we went through that exploration. And we convinced ourselves that we were going to be rich from selling these chestnuts. And when I think about this, I think about the time that we were given. I think about the adult support that nobody was saying, of course, you're not going to be rich from harvesting chestnuts in your backyard. And that encounter with open-ended materials. And that connection to early childhood for me is something that drives a lot of my thinking in the classroom, taking myself back to that place, allowing myself to think in that childlike way. So I'm curious, as we get started, just to take a brief moment here, if you are interested, to type just briefly in the chat, as Sue has done there, your earliest memory of a material or an interaction, and just a brief statement about that, and then we'll move on to our next part.
And Tessa, just one thing, when you give an exercise, you can always ask me to set a timer. So like you say, if you say, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, then I can set a timer for 2 minutes, and that may help you.
Oh, that is excellent for my time management. Okay, let's give 1 minute on this. Thanks. Seeing lots of natural materials outdoors. Interesting how the outdoors are coming as some of our earliest memories. Seeing some connections to reading books with family members and the materials of books, which are going to come up later as well. And I'm also seeing that connection to relationships, so whether it's family members or friends as we're exploring those materials. And sparkles. That connection to community too, because I'm seeing lots of thinking around that library piece. Interesting too that people are referencing place and materials. I can tell this is going to be a fun group tonight with your participation, so thanks for that. We're going to have lots of opportunities to do that sharing and to be able to connect, because we'll pull lots of great ideas from each other, as I referenced at the beginning. So I just want to give a little bit of context on my background before we start into materials. As Michelle noted, I am working right now in the Upper Grand District School Board as an early learning instructional coach. And so a lot of my context tonight is coming from my experience in this role, and I've been in this role for over a year now. The great thing is that I've been in multiple schools across various demographics, across various geographical locations, in French immersion, in English. So lots of my connections and stories tonight are some of those general trends that I'm noticing about materials in classrooms. And some lessons learned along the way that I want to highlight for you as well. So the way my role works is I go into a classroom by request, or a group of classrooms, for about 4 weeks. And I'm working specifically on a student learning need that that department or that classroom has chosen within their school. And I'm thinking about ways to support them as a co-documenter, providing some provocations, enhancing centers, modeling different items for them. So that's a little bit about where some of my stories and my context are coming from tonight, is that experience and some of those trends that I've noticed over time in this role. And the other piece about this is that I have learned so much, as I referenced in the beginning. Every time I'm in a new classroom, I'm learning new things along the way. So that's why I'm so happy to be with you tonight and to join this co-learning journey. So this is one of the first lessons that I've learned in this role and over time is to be open to being amazed every day by kids in the classroom. And so this picture to go along with this video, which I'm going to introduce in a moment, came from a classroom. This is a 5-year-old child who's exploring with a very simple material of scissors. And through the power of an adult interaction and challenging her in some of her thinking, was able to come up with this astounding art piece. And some of you on Twitter will have seen this shared a while back. So that lesson of being open to being amazed every day by every single child in our classroom. This video or poem is something that lots of you may have seen before, but it is something that every time I hear it, a different part of it resonates with me. So I'm going to invite you to click on the link to the video in the chat space. It's about a 2-minute video, and please click on the check mark when you come back in after you've finished watching that video so that we know when we can start again. Enjoy. Okay, I'm seeing we've got a good number of folks making their way back in. Lots of green check marks. Thanks for doing that. So I don't know about you, but I always get chills when I hear that poem, and particularly within that video. And so I'm just going to move into our next slide. One of the pieces of advice I was given before doing this webinar was to only choose things to talk about that I was absolutely passionate about. And this slide is a recent passion of mine. This comes from our new kindergarten program document, and it's woven all the way through the document. So we're going to start with this, and then we're going to look at a more specific example in the next slide. What I love about this is how it connects to that 100 languages thinking around children. When we look at that left side, we're looking at all of the ways in which children might demonstrate their learning and all of the pieces that are attached to each of those areas. So it's not just about what they say. It could be about what they're doing or how they're representing their thinking. And the program has been very clear that children do not need to show their learning in all 3 of those ways for each expectation. So that connection of the hundreds of ways that children can show us what they know. And then on the right side, we see the team's intentional interactions. So that important piece of responding or challenging or extending. And we're going to look at an example of that in the following slide to tease that out a little bit more as well. So something to keep in mind is connected to that 100 languages of children. So this is one example out of the kindergarten program document where we can see the example of what saying, doing, and representing might look like as attached to a specific expectation. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at this and to just write in the chat box about how you see the 100 languages of children reflected here in this example. Very different ways of children demonstrating their learning around this expectation. So we'll give about another minute, Michelle, in the timer. So how are you seeing the 100 languages of children reflected here? I'll get us started here. Thanks, Melanie. Definitely. Yeah, so that pairing of saying, but also that planning piece, the problem solving, Jen, absolutely. We're seeing the materials reflected in there as well. Yes, definitely connected to the problem solving and innovating frame. Thanks for sharing. Let's look to the next slide. And here we're looking at that other side, so the educator's intentional interactions. For me, I realized that for whatever reason, I'm much more comfortable with responding and extending the learning as an educator. And I've realized through reflection that challenging that learning is slightly more uncomfortable for me. It's that dance of when is pushing too far and when is moving them forward in where they need to be. So that's something that I've really been reflecting on lately. So let's do a connection here. How are you connecting to this, what you're seeing here, to how you respond, challenge, or extend learning in your classroom when you look at this example? About a minute for this, Michelle. I'll just repeat that again. How are you connecting to what you do to respond, challenge, or extend learning in your classroom? Is there similar thinking to me, and in one piece of this is more challenging than others? Absolutely, Julie. Those materials can be a way of responding or extending or challenging. Excellent point. And looking for the cues from the children. Lisa's agreeing as well. Absolutely, Melanie, that connection to time and slowing down and really observing and waiting and listening. Questions, absolutely. Yes, Lisa, that careful dance of when are we interrupting and when are we supporting. Excellent. I love that connection to asking the children and taking cues from the children as well. Okay, let's move into our next slide here. I've got some thinking around provocations and some of the reasons why we might use a provocation. So if this term is new for you, simply thinking about materials that provoke learning or curiosity. And so I just want to go through some of my thinking and open it up to see if there are other things that you're thinking about that we're missing here before we go into some stories about provocations. So sometimes I will put out a provocation to dig farther into an interest. So an example that's going to come up in some photos later on is trying to figure out what the big idea is behind an interest, and that thinking of teacher as researcher. Sometimes we will put out a provocation to explore an undiscovered area of curriculum. So something hasn't come up, so we're going to put some things out to provoke learning in that area. Sometimes it's around pushing thinking or investigating theories. So we've noticed a misconception in a particular area. So we very intentionally put out some things to push at that misconception. Sometimes it's simply to inspire curiosity, to draw children into other centers. So we might have children who, for example, particularly love the block center. And so we wonder if we put a particular material at the writing center, if it will start to draw them in based on the interest that we know. Also, to build in math or literacy or any of the other frames into play. We are going to be talking a little bit more about math and literacy later on. And sometimes we'll use a provocation as a diagnostic. So putting it out to see where are kids at around this, and how might that inform some of our small groups later on, or some other materials that we might want to put out. So I'm curious as to whether there's any other thinking about other reasons we might put a provocation out. And Melanie, you gave me a great reminder before about repeating the question. I'm going to put it actually in the chat box there. So give about 1 minute for any other thinking on this. Maybe there's a particular reason why you put out materials in the classroom or an experience you've had. Absolutely, sometimes just for fun. Yes, I try to think about lots of different layers within that, Shelley. Yes, that connection to bringing students together, absolutely. Yes, Jen, one of my favorites has been bringing in vinyl records to see what children would do with it because they were new to most children. Absolutely, Lisa, that connection to that 100 languages of children that they can show their learning in a variety of ways. And that creativity piece, absolutely. Thanks for your sharing. So we're going to move into some stories of provocations. And as I said earlier when we started, that stories are one of my favorite ways of connecting, both as a learner and an adult learner. I connect to that story piece and the thinking behind it, but also a way to share thinking. So this was a provocation that was used in a classroom that I was coaching in last year. And when I met with this educator, she was looking for a way to draw a particular group of children who are spending time with vehicles into some more exploration of writing and mark making. So we had a conversation about what some of that interest was. And you can see on the left side, that's what the provocation looked like before the interaction with it. So very simple materials. That's something I've thought about as well tonight too to share with you, is that these are things that a lot of the things I'm sharing tonight are typically things we have in our classroom or things we can gather from outside. So some writing materials, some vehicles, the mural paper across a train table that they had before. The vehicles are right there for them, some sticks and some tape and some straws. You can see that I've started a pathway there. So I wanted to have some sort of mark making started for them. That's not always necessary, absolutely. And then in the tray, I've got various 2D shapes. So I was very intentional about wanting to pull out some of that 2D shape language as well as they were selecting materials for their signs. On the right side, at the bottom, you can see where we moved to with this. We were very excited by the number of kids who were involved in this. We were really excited by the amount of problem solving and collaboration, as somebody had referenced in the chat room earlier, the importance of that with provocations. And so there were a few things that we thought about. Initially, it was that piece of watching what the children were doing and taking cues from them, as someone referenced before in the chat room as well. There was also pieces where we were highlighting environmental print. So you can see on the iPad as an interactive educator, we pulled up a stop sign. This was a French immersion classroom, so we talked about what it would say on a French stop sign and started to make those connections. And then in the bottom, you can see some of the different stages of where children were at. We've got some children who are understanding that symbols convey messages on the signs. There are some children who are ready to start to segment out some of those sounds. Some children who are ready for the initial sound in part P for parking. And what took us a little bit by surprise was the amount of math that we were able to document and assess within this. So you can see that taxi is parked in a parking lot there with all the parking signs, of course. So we were able to actually do a little number talk there. How many spaces do you have? They parked some cars in there as well. How many more spaces are there for cars? How many more spaces could you fit? There was some measurement as they brought in some bigger vehicles. So all of the multiple layers and then responding to the learning that's happening within there. Let's take a look at another story of a provocation. This one is one that was very close to my heart. So this was in the fall of this year, and I walked into a classroom that I was working in, and they were wanting to focus and unpack inquiry a little bit more and going with the interests of students and uncovering curriculum along the way. And so when I walked into this classroom after meeting with the educators, I have never so clearly seen a big interest in the classroom. So it was almost a sight line of what I could see. In the back of the classroom, there were about 6 kids around the water table. They had some soap over there as well. So there was all sorts of mixing and interacting with those materials. Just beside that, there was a paint easel with 4 children at the paint easel, mixing colors as they were painting. The table next to it was all of a sudden Play-Doh. And there were about 6 to 8 children involved in the Play-Doh exploration and manipulating the Play-Doh and mixing the colors together. And then there were a few kids at the Block Center, a few kids at the Reading Center. And I've never had such an aha moment of, whoa, there is something here with this interest in this class. And as we observed and watched farther, the richness of their conversations just blew us away. So this is when we moved into the teacher as researcher hat. We put that hat on. And I also connected to something that was shared with me years ago. I know Mark Battle has talked about this. Diane Cashin has talked about this. The idea of finding the verb within the interest. So what is the verb? What is the big idea that opens things up? For example, in the past, I might have looked at colors as thinking about an inquiry, but all of a sudden when I open it up to mixing, if that's what it's about, you can see the way it changes all of those things. I see Lauren's made that connection in the chat room there to some of that mixing. So we wanted to explore this with educator as researcher in mind. What is it actually about this sensory interest? So I put out some things to explore. So you can see in the top left-hand corner, we've got primary colors very intentionally chosen with some eyedroppers for the fine motor piece, some glasses to mix in, some writing materials, pens, and index cards. Another big aha for me in this role with that universal trend around materials as I move around, adult materials, things like pens, things like index cards, and there'll be lots more coming up in other slides, have been real hits everywhere I go. Then we also put in the top middle some herbs and some spices with some natural Play-Doh, thinking, okay, that would be an opportunity for mixing too if this is actually what this is about. On the right side, we've got loose parts, some writing materials, some bowls, also to do some mixing. And what we realized in this context with the top 3 photos, and it was actually me posting some of these on Twitter. So if you're not on Twitter, I highly, highly recommend it. It was Laurel Fines who made the connection for me as I posted some of the provocations. She said, oh, transforming materials, we're working on that too. And it was a huge aha. So that power of sharing with each other some of our thinking. And I'm not really sure where this is going. What do you think? What do you think we could try? And when it moved to transforming materials, I could see that's exactly what it was, because the color changing had lots of interest. The Play-Doh with the herbs, not so much, and there was a little bit in the loose parts. So I was at a bit of a loss as to what the big interest was here and how we could move that forward and continue to engage lots of kids in the explorations. So the bottom photo was kind of a response to that huge aha moment. So we had vinegar, we had the primary colors again, we had some baking soda, the trays, eyedroppers again, and lots of different sizes of containers we started to add there as well. And that transformation of materials just started to come alive there. And you could hear the joy in the children's voices. The other thing in the top left photo with the primary colors is that started to look different as time went on. That one continued to be really of interest. But the very next day, you would have seen a hand towel added to that provocation, because we realized we needed to do some scaffolded teaching about how to keep our learning environment safe and how to promote that independence. I see Julie has maybe had an experience like that before too. And all of a sudden we were able to give more space and focus our time on small group or some other provocations and come in and out of that because they could be independent. We also laminated some pieces of paper for them to do some writing on because we were noticing that index cards weren't working overly well there. And you'll see in a later slide how we started to uncover some literacy and some more math thinking through that provocation. We are going to come back to it. Another story ahead for you of provocation. I think I just keep saying that these all were my biggest aha moments, but this was another powerful one for me. You can see natural materials here as well, simple materials that we have in our classroom, rulers, scissors, just some open-ended bowls. I was very intentional with setting out this provocation on the left. There was lots of interest from the kids. It was spring. There was new growth starting. They were bringing flowers inside as they were coming in. And the educators were wanting to explore a little bit more around some measurement pieces. So I very intentionally went out to the pond by this school and picked flowers of different sizes, flowers of different stages along that life cycle, so some just buds, some that were ready to wither away, and put them out with a variety of bowls. This is a French immersion classroom, so we were hoping to incorporate some vocabulary around some parts of the flowers and plants. So you can see I did sit at this provocation and wander on by then afterwards for about 15 minutes as it went untouched. So that moment as an educator when we need to bite our tongues a little bit to see if somebody's going to come over. Sometimes we can invite them over. And in this case, in about 15 minutes, a child came over to start to explore, as you can see in the photos. So the richness of the documentation that I was able to capture here with this child, and later another child joined him, as he was exploring some of that vocabulary in French, you can see the detail of his sorting in some of the bowls on the right side. He was starting to make some connections to measuring, and I was able to do a little bit of an assessment on some of the number recognition pieces and some of his comparison language and fine motor with the scissors. It was that look of initially, am I allowed to cut these? Oh, and all of a sudden started to do that. And it was so rich. And then it happened, as they say in the books. On the left side, you can see everything got dumped into one bowl. And I thought, okay, that was not how I expected it to go. You know, I had promised these educators we'd have this rich measurement that was coming out, and it's all in one bowl. So it was this huge moment for me of, okay, what am I going to do about this? And Julie's one step ahead of me here with salad. Absolutely. I sat to watch and see, where is he going to go with this? And as soon as he dumped it in a bowl, 4 other children came over. And the talk became the salad they were making. So I had to make the decision at that point to be intentionally responsive. And that's a term that I've been exploring a lot. I'm seeing Melanie talk about sitting down and engaging at the table with the children, and Lisa as well. Absolutely a great way to invite children into provocations. As they started mixing, I started to think about, okay, what do we have that we can pull in to take this in a different direction and still be uncovering curriculum along the way? I can come back to measurement. I can do that either in a small group or with a different provocation. Let's go with this. So you can see I grabbed a clipboard as fast as I could, and I started to model a little bit of French writing and also some of the English that they were sharing with me at the time. We started to talk about numbers and price, so a hefty price of $50 for a salad, as you can see, I'm sure dressed with some gold flakes or something. So that modeling. And then another child came over and we started talking about the name of the restaurant. He said, I know, let's call it McDonald's. So over to the paint easel he went. And it all of a sudden drew in, we had about 10 children involved in this investigation. The following day, as you can see on the left side, that provocation looked very, very different. So gone were some of the measurement tools. They came out in a different way later on. And we had started to respond to what the children were doing. So you can see the recipe book, some different writing materials, the pens, and some of the lists, some of those adult pieces that I referenced earlier. And we started with a piece of documentation. So we started with showing a photo from the day before with the whole group before we went out to centers and to learning through playtime. And those children talked about their experience. And then I said, I've added a few other things over there. If you're interested in exploring alongside so-and-so, you might choose to go in. And absolutely, Lauren, that is another big lesson for me in this role, is the power of a piece of documentation or a document moving that inquiry or that interest forward. So all of a sudden there were other children involved in that investigation because we were using that documentation almost as a provocation within a provocation. So you can see that children started to go over and we're starting to take orders from the educators and from peers. I was very easily able to see within some of that context where I might pull children into a small group. For example, one of these children, when they were writing, were able to segment words very easily orally and move into the writing. So I could see where she was at. Another child wasn't able to do that yet orally. So I could see that she would fit in a small group where we could work on segmenting some of those words, even as connected to some of the menu pieces that they had been doing. In the top, you can see they started to, we talked about table numbers, so they started to number some of the dishes that they were taking out to tables. So again, a hugely powerful reminder of both that documentation piece and also that being intentionally responsive around what the children are doing with the materials. So let's have a moment to reflect, because I've been doing lots of excited sharing with you. And I'm going to invite you to choose whatever resonates with you on this slide. So if you could just put, I'm making a connection, I'm sharing a reflection, whatever works for you. And Michelle, if we could put maybe a minute and a half on the timer for this. Our discussion about provocation, I was seeing lots in the chat room, so thank you for all of that sharing. Share about how you're connecting, reflecting, inspecting, or directing around that conversation. So Melanie, that makes me wonder if sometimes that can be a fairly universal interest, and where that interest comes from. Karyn, absolutely. That back and forth between educators in terms of materials and planning. Julie, a question about provocations beginning with a read aloud. I would say absolutely it could, but it could be simply those materials at the table to invite curiosity too. Yeah, Christina, absolutely. That intentional piece with provocations and that openness to be responsive within that, but always that intention. Great to see some connections that some of this is validating. Yes, Tracy, that in the moment piece, absolutely. We talked about that a little bit earlier, about sitting and being a part of that. And that openness to go in different directions, I'm seeing lots throughout too. The verb piece is a challenge, absolutely. And yes, actually keeping it simple, that's going to continue to come up tonight too. We can use very simple materials in our class with slight tweaks to get at different thinking. Yes, Patricia, too, knowing your group and knowing if we can start small with just one provocation in an area where children are interested in going. Great, thank you for that sharing. I'm just going to let you take a look at this quote that comes from our document. And I just love this. It resonates so deeply with me about, it just paints such an incredible picture of the environments that we're striving to create. And I also connect to my past practice. And I've told this story before with some of our educators that it used to be I'd set out materials, particularly art materials, when children were coming in from recess. And I would say over and over again, don't touch. Don't touch them. We're coming back to those later. Don't touch them. And when we start to think in this way of our environment as a third teacher and provocations to inspire curiosity, all of a sudden it's a real flip of that. Why aren't they touching? Or please touch. What are they going to do with it? So it's something I think about a lot in terms of our journey and how our thinking can change over time. I'm going to invite you in a moment to take a look at this video. Karyn Callaghan is somebody, she's a hero of mine, absolutely, and there's some really interesting big ideas in this video. It comes from the Think, Feel, Act series, which is connected to childcare through the ministry website, but lots of really applicable pieces in kindergarten. So I'm going to invite you to take a look at this video. It's about 5 minutes. You can click either in the chat or, as Michelle said earlier, take that link and put it in your browser. And please give us a green check mark when you have finished and you're coming back into the chat room. Thank you. Okay, it looks like we've got lots of folks making their way back in. I see Christina is eager to chat about this video, and I love that, Christina, because I love it too. I'm just going to put out some reflective questions. You may choose to choose one of these to talk about in the chat room here, but you also might just choose to do like Christina and Patricia and just talk generally about what we saw. I love all of the participation that's happening tonight, so let's put about 2.5 minutes on our timer to talk about some impressions from this video. Interesting, that home connection, Mallory. Nicole, I hear you. If you could have seen my desk in the classroom when I had a desk, you you would have laughed. Patricia, that less is more piece really connected with me too. And the children's voice. The other thing I'm thinking around your point, Lauren, about the children's voice is how are they showing us through their actions too, what they need or don't need. Seeing how children respond, absolutely. I hadn't thought about the camera piece either, and so interesting from their perspective. Yes, either adding or removing. That embedded writing into what we need. Absolutely, when we have storage space challenges and we can't put things in the hallway, that's definitely a challenge. I love that term of editing your room. Sharing space and some of the challenges that go along with that, absolutely. Thanks for your sharing around that. I had a lot of standouts that were very similar to what you were thinking as well. Something I loved was that comment about everything is a theory. So when we're moving things in the classroom, it's all about what the theory might be, and that, again, educator is researcher, which clearly I connect to. And moving our certainties about our environment to questions, which allows for that deeper reflection piece too. And move into our next slide here, and some more learning stories to share, as well as some photos. So here has been another aha moment for me in this role, is the idea of areas in the classroom and nooks combined with flexibility. So I credit my former teaching partner when I was in the classroom, Holly Dalgy, with the idea of nooks and her eye for design, which is something that really resonated with me and I'm carrying forward in some of my conversations with educators. And so I borrowed this photo as an example from a classroom that I was working in recently, and the educators talked about their blocks and wanting to focus on being able to pull some more learning out of their blocks and to support through the environment. And what they had said was they had, I wish I would have taken a before picture, but hindsight is 20/20. Their blocks were in two different places. So on the right side of that, the white piece of furniture that you see on the right is a kitchen center in their dramatic play. So they had some blocks where you see them there, and then the other half in the back of the dramatic play center. And they were noticing, as children were going to get more blocks if they needed them, that it was getting in the way of the play at the dramatic play center. They were finding they were kind of being interspersed throughout the classroom, which they were okay with, but they also wanted children to be able to build kind of more complex designs within a particular area. So we redesigned this area, and I can tell you that it doesn't always look sorted this way, as we know as kindergarten educators, but we are able to build some sorting in and some comparing and measurement as we put things away. But we also talked about what simple materials can we put out to pull out either some math or literacy. So you can see, apparently I love rulers, some more rulers at the center, clipboards, again, that adult material with pens attached to it, and then the smaller blocks and containers beside. And what was important to us was that there's still that flexibility that if children, of course, are wanting to take blocks somewhere to impact their learning in a different area, they are welcome to. But what we've started to notice that there's been a ton more of, a lot more of intention and focus with the building that we're seeing. So in the top left photo, another powerful moment for me. We as kindergarten educators look at this and know it's not haphazard building. But for me, it was the conversations and the representations of thinking, that left side of that image that we talked about, and the doing around that learning in that image. So this was children making a connection to volcanoes. And we had some nonfiction volcano books in the classroom, so they were making that connection. And their story was that lava was about to erupt. So they needed to wedge all of the blocks in the nooks and crannies, which I'm going to steal from Patricia out of the chat room there, to prevent the lava from coming up through the holes. So the amount of thinking around balance we can see and measurement as to what was going to fit in where really stood out. But the level of the storytelling. So at one point there were about 8 students in this area, and they were all working together to stop this lava from erupting. And they were going back and forth between the book and the structure they had created. In the end, they had used, I think, almost all the blocks off the shelf. But the amount of problem solving and collaboration that was happening together was incredible. The bottom left corner, there were children talking about making a garage for a truck. And I said, oh, I wonder how you'll know if the truck will fit. Again, that connection to educator interactions. And one of the children, I couldn't have written it better, said, oh, we better measure. Oh, let's go get the rulers. And started to think about how they needed 2 rulers for some blocks, and they even started talking about width and length, so there was some background knowledge around there, absolutely. And so there was that real intent with materials. So again, simple materials and lots of rich thinking there. On the right side, you can see that interaction of going back and forth between the books and the blocks. So I'm sure a lot of you connect with that piece about a simple change of the types of books that are at that center and how that can impact the play. And we're still seeing lots of really intentional building happening and a lot of that storytelling as well. So this is our last video, and then we've got a little chunk of some things afterwards. This is just a 1-minute piece found on EduGains. I hummed and hawed about leaving it in or taking it out, but there's something about it that I think really enhances what we're talking about already. So I'll give you about a minute to take a look at that, and please use your check mark when you come back in. Looks like most of us are making our way back in. So just a short kind of reiteration of some of the things we've talked about already, but really that connection to letting the children tell us what they need, and also us thinking intentionally about the space and the curriculum, and that observing piece. And as someone referenced before, that wanting to talk as a team about what we're noticing and what we might adjust or enhance or adapt. So we're going to come back to this block center piece, and this is one of the many pieces of co-learning that I referred to at the beginning of our webinar. Let's think about our 4 frames in the new document, and let's start with belonging and contributing. So the first question that I've got on this slide too. If we were wanting to inspire children to see themselves as dramatists, which we find in belonging and contributing, let's just popcorn out some ideas around what materials might we put at the block center to uncover some of that learning about ourselves as dramatists. So give about a minute to popcorn out some ideas, and we'll steal all sorts of ideas from each other. Oh, lots of us are on the same page with some costumes and some scarves and fabric. Absolutely. Loose parts and animals. Yes, just the way a small change, Patricia, can change the type of play that's happening there. Great idea, Lauren. Train station. Even just some chairs, Patricia, to enhance what might be happening with that. Mirrors, Catherine, absolutely. Hadn't thought of that one, Jenny. Books written as plays. Yes, mirrors can be so powerful, can't they? Especially as connected to that dramatist piece. Okay, let's do another minute around our second question. So now that we're going, if we wanted to uncover that idea of children taking an inquiry stance, which happens fairly naturally at the Block Center, but what else might we add? That questioning, theorizing around the problem solving, innovating. About a minute for that. The simplicity of just some photos and how that might impact things, and books as well that are so simple to change. Yes, bringing the outdoors in. That challenge piece, great idea, Lauren. I love that, Karyn, that they might come back to or they might revisit something that somebody else has done. That question again. Absolutely, Diane, thanks for that point of removing as well. We're talking about enhancing, but absolutely removing to see what might happen. Yeah, that connection to both literacy and problem solving of the bridge piece. Interesting, water in a pan, I love it. Okay, the third prompt, if we want to inspire children to write, coming from the Developing Literacy and Math Behaviors frame, a minute of brainstorming what we might add. Well, we have lots of people on the same page here with a variety of paper, absolutely. Post-it notes are always a hit. Grid paper, thanks, Jen. Different tools for writing, absolutely. iPads, Christina, that's not often one I think of, but that would be so rich there. Yes, some bigger pieces of paper. Some, Scrabble letters, Lisa, to connect to some of the building that's happening already. Yes, I just taking photos, allowing them to type through something like Pit Collage. Actual blueprints, Rita, yes. Draws children in. That authentic reason for writing, Catherine, of making a sign to save something or to send a message to somebody. Great. And our last piece, coming from the self-regulation and well-being frame, what could we add, or I'm going to build on what was talked about before, or remove, to allow children to explore different movement skills? About a minute for this. Music. I like the idea of instruments, too, that they can be creating some of their own music, absolutely. So we can see how connected all of these frames are, as we know that you're trying to target a particular area, but everything is so interwoven. Thinking about different levels I'm seeing come out as well in terms of that movement and some of that risk-taking in movement. Yes, the overhead projector. I love that one too, Diane. Yes, and how balancing can so easily be explored through just adjusting some of the blocks, Melanie, too. That's great. Thank you for that sharing. As you can tell, I love Karyn Callaghan, as I said before. This quote, and I should have said earlier too, the videos and quotes, with the exception of the 100 languages video, of course, are all coming from our program document within the environment section in the front matter. I just love this. How well does each part of the environment in our classrooms invite investigation, lingering, conversation, and collaboration? It's, for me, one of those questions that comes from the article that's on the Think, Feel, Act series, where that video comes from. It's a question within the article from Karyn Callaghan, and it's one of those stop you in your tracks kind of questions. So I'm curious what your thinking is around this. What does this question make you think about, or where might you dig deeper into your own practice within environment when you look at this question? Lingering is my favorite too, Melanie. Could you tell the way I lingered on that word? So we'll take just a minute or so to discuss some of our thinking. Absolutely, Rita, the outdoor environment. We've focused mostly on the indoors today, but that connection is so important, that outdoor piece and the indoor, bringing the outdoors in as well. Yeah, that connection to slowing down. Patricia with the lingering. Oh, Jenny, you'll have to let us know what you observe. That time pace. Yes, that connection to open-endedness for us to allow children to explore in different ways, Lauren. It's true, Patricia, there's all sorts of tasks throughout the day, you're right, and sometimes we forget that piece, so it's good to have that time to reflect as a reminder sometimes too. Thanks for your sharing around that. As Melanie was saying in the chat room too, I was connecting to that lingering piece, and I was thinking about my own environment when I was in the classroom, and I could think of some spaces where I felt they were really encouraging some lingering, but other areas where it was, for whatever reason, they were moving in quickly and moving out quickly. So I had a lot of thinking about what areas do promote that and what areas do I need to think about adjusting a little bit as well. And taking that time, Lauren, as you're saying there too, to allow us to kind of develop a theory about what is happening here within our environment, and do I need to change something right away. Mallory, absolutely. How are we leaving traces of their learning along the way instead of removing things all the time? And there's sometimes that we can't help that, but you're right, when we can leave those traces, it really does allow them to linger and to dig deep. I'm going to move into our next slide. And Ashley, these photos might look familiar to you. Ashley was part of some of these photos in a discussion that we had one day with some capacity with a team we worked with. So we've talked a little bit about this, but I just wanted to come back to, again, that big lesson that I've learned around adult materials and around open-ended materials, as Lauren, you were referencing a little bit earlier on as well. So I'm just going to talk through kind of a think aloud behind some of these provocations with those two things in mind. So on the left side, we've got some 10 frames, popsicle sticks, some loose parts, calculator, which is absolutely a hit, pens again, and as we referenced when we talked about the block center, lots of different materials for writing. So we've got the whiteboard, but also sticky notes as well. I noticed with the calculator, often it turned into a phone. I was able to do, a brief assessment on some number recognition within that too, but the joy of being able to use something that was an adult material stood out absolutely. Oh, it looks like we've got a 7-year-old that's taking a look at some of these as well. In the top middle, you see the keyboard. I have a colleague, a tech coach, who always says when she sees this photo, where's the rest of the computer? But some thinking around how might we assess some letter or sound knowledge in a playful way. So this was one of the provocations that we put out as a diagnostic, as we had referred to before, to get a feel for where kids were at in some of their literacy development along the continuums of literacy. And you can't see, or maybe you can if it's big on your screen, but there was a cue there. We talked earlier about some challenges. There was a cue en français about what can you do with letters. On the right side, just a simple addition of a tape measurer with a ramp. Ramps were coming up when we talked about movement earlier as well, and a clipboard with a pen, and then the bottom piece. So just an adjustment of some of the materials we had used with the nature restaurant. So just some simple Play-Doh, some containers. Again, that calculator shows up, and a timer there as well. So sometimes thinking about what sort of adult materials could we add to this that might just pull kids on in who might not normally go to these areas is something that I've been considering. And absolutely, Patricia, clipboards everywhere, pens everywhere, books, nonfiction and fiction everywhere too. And cars are very popular, Julie, you're right. I also want to talk about and just come back to that learning around the power of interactions. So sometimes I'm in a classroom and I might have brought in some materials that I think are not super rich or a bit more low level and I'm wanting to enhance them in some sort of way, but realizing the power of my interactions with the materials no matter what they are. So one thing I've been exploring on the left side you can see here is that idea of why would scientists write? And having that conversation either with that group of kids or with the whole class. This was something we did with that group of children who were at that provocation. And why would we need to measure? So in the top left, you can see that's when we moved to the laminated sheets with the color mixing from the slides earlier. And you can see the corner of a towel that was added there. But talking about how some kids before were capturing the colors they were creating and naming their colors and being able to do an embedded assessment within there to think about our small groups going forward. To the right of that, you can see the thinking around initial sounds. So how might we label some of the colors that we've got there? And later on, as I referenced, we added different sizes of containers so that we could look at those comparisons or ordering and thinking around capacity. In the bottom, you can see les escargots, which was a French word that came to me very easily in a classroom the other day. But I sat down at this table. It was clay on the table, and I just started to work. There was another child there as well, and she asked me about what I was doing. And when I said les escargots, there was a child at the center who was hearing it as SKs in the classroom, and so he was talking about being a JK. So I wrote it out. So there was the context and the reason for me writing it out. Oh, let's actually look at this word. You're right. I'm hearing that S sound at the beginning too. And then one of the children started to talk about the number of snails that I had there. So you see a 10, but it was going up as she added more. And she was making predictions about, the educator had said 1 more minute. And I said, how many more escargots do you think you'll be able to make? So just building that in very simply with simple materials. Just above that was actually at that block center that we looked at earlier, and they were talking about bad guys and good guys and how the bad guys would know where they could go and where they couldn't go. So it was just that simple conversation of, oh, it sounds like you're wanting them to have a message. I wonder what would happen if you weren't there when they arrived. I'll pop a sign on the front if you'd like. Sure, they said. What would you like it to say? So some of that modeled writing. And then in the top right was a restaurant dramatic play center in a classroom. And it was one of those situations where the educators were saying, they're just not writing. We put the things there and they're not writing. And as I observed, I found the same thing. So it was a conversation of, do they know why to use these materials? Do they have that authentic context? So again, some modeled writing about why would we make a menu? Oh, I'm going to start to write some of the things that you're selling in your restaurant or that are on your menu. And then I said just simply, you could add some things later when I go if you'd like, if you add other things. And sure enough, a child started to add. We brought that documentation back the following day, and we left it blank the next day, and all of a sudden children were using that. So the power of us as educators and how important that is. Just going to look at our time here. I'm just going to slip on through these pieces because I really want to get to this last piece. So maybe I'll just go back so you can see. We're just going to do a reflection there. And I'm just taking the educator team reflection out of the curriculum document around small group that you can find in the front matter if you're interested in that piece. But I do want to get to this point so that we can share together. So another big piece of learning for me in this role has been simple materials connected to our childhood, which is what we started with tonight when we talked about that chestnut tree and our experiences. And materials that we can use across the continuum, continui, I learned today is the plural, of literacy or of math. But the examples I've got tonight are of literacy. So I just want to show these 2 examples and then share some of our favorite ideas for our simple small group materials. So when I was starting to think a little bit more about guided reading and how I might invite some children in who were absolutely ready for it, but had not yet found the joy, I guess I'll say, I started to think about myself as a child, and maybe some of you can connect to being in bed at night and the lights are supposed to be off and having our flashlight under the covers with a good book. And how that felt to me. So I started to think about how can we give children that experience with guided reading for those children who are ready to start exploring some of that. And I started to think about finger flashlights, which you can just buy at Dollarama. And so I introduced them, and I think it was a powerful material for me. On the right side, you can see is one of the first times we introduced it in small group. And it was powerful for lots of reasons. One was that it was very easy for me to see as children were doing their guided reading at different points and on different pages where they were with the tracking. It was also fun for them. It was a novel way for them to find some different sight words, if that was our focus in our reading together. And it brought back that feeling of joy when it comes to reading. And powerful for me because in this instance, there was a child in this group, and I get emotional just thinking about it now, and it was the first time that she saw herself as a reader. And I don't know that it was the power of that material necessarily, but there was something about that material and that experience and the educator interaction that for the rest of the day she went around telling everyone she could read, any adult that came into the room, any child, and was taking her finger flashlight to read the story to them. So the power of something so simple. To the left of that, so this is my thinking around similar materials across the continuum of literacy. So I was working with a group of children who weren't yet ready for guided reading. We were working on segmenting sound, so you can't see with her hands, but it was the word cat there. Exact same material. I had just written out cat on C-A-T on 3 separate pieces of paper, and we were working on blending that word together. So put your flashlight on each letter as you're making the sound, blending it together and going quicker as we go. So lots of different reasons we could do that. We could go to the very beginning of the literacy continuum of phonological awareness when we think about word awareness in a sentence. So how many words do you hear orally in a sentence, which is close to the beginning of that continuum, and they could be turning on and off their flashlight for each word that they hear. So very simple, but when we think about those open-ended materials that's been coming up, we can use them in multiple ways. So it's not having to create a million different literacy centers to get at all of the needs in our classroom. I can use the same thing in a variety of ways. Some of the other things that I love to use that are open-ended are eyeball finger puppets that you can get at Dollarama in the birthday section as well. The finger flashlights are in the birthday section as well, Julie, so all in the like the loot bag section. So you just pop a little eyeball finger on your finger, and they can read along with you. We've used them just with nonfiction books at a center and called them reading buddies as well, that they can read to their reading buddy. I also love dome lights that you can get at Dollarama that you just press them on and off. They're similar to the lights that you would put under a counter to turn on and off. And so those work really well as well for some of the segmenting and blending pieces. I write on them with a whiteboard marker, so I write some of those sounds on there if they're blending chunks together. Or they can turn it on when they've got their idea to share in a small group. So again, very simple. Fly swatters and salt trays are some of my other favorites that can work along that entire continuum of literacy development. So I really wanted to get to this piece. So let's take 2 minutes now. I'm seeing somebody was sharing about 3D glasses already. Patricia, thanks for getting that conversation started. So let's just take 2 minutes as we finish up to share one of your very favorite materials for small group instruction that you can't live without. Yes, swizzle sticks I'm seeing on there, Rita, absolutely too, and can be used for so many different reasons along the continuum. Whiteboards, yes, that open-ended piece that we can just adjust as needed within our instruction. Absolutely, Christina. Wiki sticks seem to be a favorite. Yes, lots of simple materials that we have in our classroom, 10 frames, colored popsicle sticks. Patricia, tell me more about PVC pumps. Yes, the small toys for French vocabulary or for some of those phonological awareness or phonemic awareness pieces in the tubs, absolutely. Oh, I see what you're saying, Patricia. I also love Post-it notes that you can really easily write some words to blend out or sight words before moving into guided reading, and you can do it right there in the moment as the children do a picture walk. So we have our intention ahead of time, but we don't have to have a lot of things prepared because we can do that within some of the instructional time. Lots of great ideas. And this is what I mean about that co-learning piece. I don't know that there's any hard and fast rules, Patricia, about how long to keep the groups for, but I tend to say, depending on the group and knowing the children, about 5 to 7 minutes. Some children can do maybe about 7 to 10, but particularly at the beginning, I try to make it really intentional and very focused and fun so that it makes it an easy transition to come back to that later on, and that they know that it's going to be brief before they move on. Okay, so that's our time for that slide. So I'm just going to take a look at some final words here before we finish up. The wider the range of possibilities we offer children, the more intense will be their motivations and the richer their experiences. We must widen the range of topics and goals, the types of situations we offer and their degree of structure, the kinds and combinations of resources and materials, and the possible interactions with things, peers, and adults. And I just loved the way that this quote summed up our conversation tonight, all of those different pieces from interactions to time, to materials, to the degree of structure, with that being intentional but also being intentionally responsive. So I thought it was a perfect way to sum up. I can't thank you enough for your participation tonight. It was fast and furious to keep up with that chat, but this hour and a half has just flown by, and I have learned so much, and I'm going to take so many notes after our conversation. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules tonight.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you so much. There's never any harm ending a bit early, since most of our sessions often end late, and participants are always very happy to get back to their families. So we actually had a fairly small group in the first few minutes before starting the session, and then many of you joined along the way, and after a few minutes the class was packed. So ultimately this turned out to be an extremely successful session with lots of participants and tons of participation. So and Tessa managed to keep on top of all your comments, even when they were coming in fast and furiously, and I must say I was impressed. I guess this is the kind of brain you need when you're dealing with 20 or 25 energetic kids, or 45 energetic teachers. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Anyway, for me, it's always very special to moderate OTF Connect sessions for kindergarten teachers. I truly think that it takes unique and wonderful qualities to be a kindergarten teacher, and tonight's session confirmed once again my past experiences. So you guys were all so positive and enthusiastic throughout the session. It was really great. And Tessa, a note on your snail story. In France, as you may know, we actually eat escargot, and we also eat frog legs, and this is why the Brits actually call us froggies. Our nickname is froggies, and in return we call the Brits roast beef, because we eat our steaks rare and they eat them well done. So anyway, enough of culinary stories. But again, I want to thank you so much for this excellent and particularly lively presentation. And as always, I also want to thank all of you for being such fantastic participants and motivated teachers, and for sharing your ideas all along this session. I have a couple more slides, 4 to be exact. So if you give me another few minutes, if you allow me to take a few more minutes of your time. Okay, let me move to the next slide. I'm going to skip these ones. Okay, here it is. We have a number of particularly interesting sessions in the coming days. Tomorrow, a presentation by Carl Pierce on multiplications. Carl is one of my favorite facilitators. We often work together. So if you know anyone who may be interested, we still have a few places available for tomorrow. We have 2 presentations for kindergarten teachers on April 5th and on May the 3rd by Cheryl Emmerich and Stacy Sims. I actually noted that, not Stacy, Tracy Sims, and I actually noted that Tracy was actually in the room tonight. I saw her name. Unfortunately, there's a lot of interest for these 2 sessions, and both already sold out. However, we sometimes, almost always, have a couple of people canceling at the last minute. So feel free to check on the day of these sessions if you're interested. We may be able to fit a couple participants at the last minute. And then on April 20, we have Laura Ginny Newman. She is back for the second part of her presentation on critical thinking in the math classroom. The dates for these presentations have changed, so I just want to confirm that it is actually on April 20 and not to be missed if you enjoyed the part 1 of that presentation a few weeks ago. And we have, of course, many more. This is just a few samples. We have many more sessions coming up, and I'm going to paste in the chat box the links for our calendar and for our resource page. So feel free to visit our calendar to see what's coming up. We also have something I want to tell you about another opportunity provided by OTF and the Ministry of Education. If you are a qualified teacher and completed an additional qualification course in math, technology, or kindergarten, you may be eligible for a $450 subsidy, and I'm going to provide you with the link so that you can claim that that small subsidy. Here it is. We also welcome your feedback. It's extremely important to us. It helps us with improving our programs year over year. When quitting Blackboard, you will be presented with the opportunity to give us your feedback on tonight's session and fill a short online questionnaire. The survey only takes a few minutes. If you could do it right after the session, it would be greatly appreciated. You should be redirected automatically to the survey page when quitting Blackboard. As a new feature of our webinars, after completing the survey, you will be redirected to a page allowing you to enter your name, and then you will receive a certificate of participation to this training session that you will be able to add to your professional resume. If you don't have the time to do any of this tonight, don't worry, we will send you tomorrow an email with the link for all these different pages. And I'm also actually going to paste that in the chat box, the access to the feedback survey and to the certificate of participation. And I also would like to provide you with the link to the resource page for Tessa's presentation tonight, and it should be live tomorrow morning. So here is that link. I'm going to upload everything tonight so that it's ready tomorrow morning. So that's it. I just want to conclude this presentation, and I would like to invite you to follow OTF on social media as well as on our OTF website. I will now end the recording of the session. Thank you once again for your participation in tonight's session. We certainly hope to see you soon on OTF Connects. Bonne fin de soirée à tous et à toutes, et encore merci de votre participation. Nous espérons vous retrouver très bientôt sur OTF Connects. Merci.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.